from the City of Presidents. It's the All About Quincy Podcast. This is your host, John Melly. Join me as we explore the history, hidden gems, and highlight the businesses with great stories that all tell the tale why Quincy, Massachusetts is a great place to live. Hey there, it's John. Thanks for joining me today. I do appreciate it. Welcome to episode 3 of the All About Quincy Podcast. First thing I want to do is thank folks for their kind comments about my interview with Tim Cahill from last week. Alicia, Janet, thanks for reaching out on Facebook and giving me a thumbs up or a nice comment about that episode. I really do appreciate it. So, complete this saying. Bibbidi bobbidi. No, not boo. Bee. Bibbidi bobbidi bee. Yeah, the reason why I'm saying bibbidi bobbidi bee is this week in June in 2021 is Pollinator Week. And to celebrate Pollinator Week, you're thinking, what is this guy? He must be buzzed. Well, I am. I got a bee buzz. We're interviewing a beekeeper. Sam is from Best Bees. I mentioned in my last episode that I have a couple of honeybee hives in my yard, and I love them, and my neighbors love them because different houses around the neighborhood have all these types of fruit trees, and they're getting more fruit. Plus, my blueberry bushes are booming. And so a lot of people don't know a lot about the honeybee, so I thought that it would be a good thing to do to have a beekeeper on and talk about it. So I mentioned a couple of things in my interview with Sam from Best Bees, and I want to direct you to the show notes for this episode. It's episode 3 at allaboutquincypodcast.com. And when you go there for this episode, you can see a couple of videos. One video is of the beekeeper literally putting her bare hand into a cluster of honeybees that have swarmed and landed in one of the bushes in my yard. The second video is that beekeeper capturing the queen and putting it in a temporary hive, and I'm literally standing in my yard in jeans and a t-shirt with my iPad recording the swarm flying around me, and was perfectly safe. And it was so cool to see. So if you want to see those videos, go to allaboutquincypodcast.com, episode 3, and click in the show notes, and you'll be able to see it. We also have some other links there for anybody who's interested in learning more about bees. This is a little longer than the other episode, so let's just head on over to my interview with Sam. As I mentioned at the beginning of the show, my guest today is Sam Jennings, who is the sales manager and beekeeper at the Best Bees Company in Boston. How are you, Sam?
I'm good, John. Thanks for having me.
And you deal with honeybees, not bumblebees, because that way we wouldn't say the Best Bees Company of the bumblebees in Boston.
No, we primarily work with honeybees, but we do it for all bees too. So, honeybees are an indicator species that we're able to use for research purposes to measure the health of the native pollinator species around our beehives.
Now, folks listening to the show may be wondering, why am I talking about bees? Well, I have to tell everybody that I have a couple of honeybee hives that Sam's company, the Best Bees Company, helps manage, and they tend to every month, and we get honey from. And Sam is involved with some beekeeping in Quincy. We're going to talk about all kinds of things, but we're going to be talking about the importance of honeybees and pollinators, because this is Pollinator Week in June. We celebrate Pollinator Week, and I have had an interest in honeybees that goes back to my childhood. I think my parents or an aunt gave me a National Geographic subscription for kids. And along with that subscription came like 2 or 3 hardcover books. And one of those books, Sam, was on honeybees. And from
very good.
And from an early age, I've always been fascinated by honeybees. And then when I was a kid, my parents had their house painted by a guy by the name of Mr. Thomas. And Mr. Thomas also kept bees. And one day he came to finish up painting, and he brought this gigantic jar of honey. And it was a really nice gift, and it was delicious. And I was just fascinated about honeybees and beekeeping. And I don't keep bees because I got enough on my plate. And I think my wife would be like, "You're going to do what now?" But she read an article in Boston Magazine, I think number of years ago, and she says, "Oh, you might be interested in this." And I said, "Oh, this is kind of cool." And it was one of those things where I said to myself, Sam, I said, if I'm still thinking about this a year from now, I'll look into it some more. And so I did. And I've been a client of yours ever since. I know I'm talking a lot, but I love the honeybees. They're very relaxing. And
yours have done quite well, haven't they, in Quincy?
Yeah.
You've had a hive go 3 years, and you've got one hive now that's on year 2, right?
Yep. That's correct. Yep. We had it survive. That's a question that I get asked all the time. And is when the winter comes, people say, "Where do the honeybees go?" And I say, they are right there in that box. So
that's incredible.
And people are amazed by the honeybee. Explain to people why honeybees stay in their hive over the winter and that whole process.
I know it's crazy to imagine them, finding a way to stay warm on these cold New England winter nights. But, with Best Bees, we don't move the hives down south. Some beekeeping operations may be, moving the bees down to Florida. There's snowbirds that go down there and, collect the forage and produce more bees down there to extend the season. But, at Best Bees, we're about establishing the hives on site to survive the winters year round, making sure they have enough resources. And essentially what they do in the hive over winter is they cluster together around their queen. There's one queen and then a bunch of worker bees in every beehive. And they use their wings, they beat their wings, creating friction, creating warmth and heat for the hive in this ball of bees, basically, that's just in the center of the beehive. They're not really fully hibernated. They do have a reduced metabolic, rate at that point. But, if it warms up on a warm day above 50, 55 degrees, you'll see them come out the door and, use the bathroom, do a cleansing flight, as we like to say. Mm-hmm. But, they go right back in at nighttime and cluster together. And they move through the hive as a ball, actually, to access their honey stores over winter. And early March, sometimes late February, the queen begins to start laying her eggs again. Preparing a new batch of worker bees for the spring season. And from there, the colony will grow in time with the early nectar flows here in New England.
It's really always fascinating when that starts to happen in late winter, early spring, as you were saying, that there might be some snow still on the ground. And you see these bees flying out, and then you'll see like these little orange droplets in the snow. And bee poop. Yeah. And I'll have it on my car. And sometimes I'll see it on my car as I'm going to go drive somewhere. And I may not have noticed that they've been out, but I'll see that and I'll go, "Oh, they made it through the winter," or at least they've made it this far. One of the questions that I get that question all the time. Where do they go in the wintertime? And their honeybees are different from a lot of other bee species in that they collect extra honey so that they do make it over the winter. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's right. There's over 20,000 different species of bees. Some of them are solitary bees, bumblebees, mason bees, and they don't always, live the same type of life as a honeybee would, in the sense of they don't have a large colony and hive where their, instinct is to collect a surplus of resources. Mm-hmm. So they just operate a little bit differently, overwintering in different types of social environments. Sometimes all of the queens will, return to the same location to cluster together for winter and then disperse back and start new small little nests. But there are so many different bees, and it's always great to see different types of bee species, because it does indicate, that your area is healthy enough to sustain different types of pollinator populations. Essentially, they've also all these different bees have evolved over time in step with plants. And so each of them, has a different length tongue. So certain bees have really long length tongues, or medium length, shorter length tongues. And this allows them to forage from different flowers. So not every bee species will even forage from the same set of flowers. And they use different methods to, get that nectar, get that pollen from the flower.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. One comment I get a lot when I'll be out, I think we talked before we started recording this program. I have a couple of dogs. You have a dog. And when I'll be out walking the dog, somebody will say, "Oh, how are the bees?" Or if they don't know that I have bees, I'll talk about the bees to somebody. And a comment I get a lot is, "Oh, you know how you can get rid of those?"
Oh
And
God.
yeah, and I'm saying, no, I don't want to get rid of the honeybees because this is on purpose. They're there in my yard on purpose.
Yeah, yeah.
The honeybee really isn't interested in people. It's
That's right.
they're interested in flowers and water. That's
Hmm.
also cool. I have a little bird bath, and sometimes they'll cluster around the edge of a bird bath on a hot day. You can see them drinking and flying back to the hive with it. It's cool. But the bees don't sit there and or fly around and go, "Oh, look, there's a person. Let's go get it." Uh, Unless you're like diving into their hive and really disturbing them, or you're swatting at them while they're trying to do their thing, they don't care
Hmm.
about us, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they're completely non-aggressive, honeybees especially, but even all of the other native bee species, including like yellow jackets and wasps for the most part, when you encounter them in the wild, they're foraging. They're searching for food, whatever that may be. Honeybees are looking for flowers. They typically know exactly where they're going. In the
Mm-hmm.
hive, they communicate to each other where the nearest nectar and pollen sources are. So those worker bees are following these predetermined flight paths right to the source. So they're busy, they're making trips back and forth, and they're not concerned about you. If they bump into you, they keep it moving. A lot of gardeners will know this. As you're gardening, there's going to be bees on the flowers, bees on your plants, and you can move them, brush them aside, pick the flowers, shake them off. The bees aren't going to get disturbed by even that type of activity. It really comes down to defending the hive itself, defending their home, their nest, and their queen. So when those nests and those hives get disturbed, that's when bees do exhibit their defensiveness, and they don't do so independently. Collectively, they start to release their defense pheromones, which really trigger that defensive response, and it's limited to the hive itself. So, the best thing to do when you see a nest is to take a minute to reconsider, disturbing it. It's not going to be something that would be done quickly, and even consider whether or not the bees are any nuisance to you, or if they've just found a great home, because the native bees especially are dying, and anywhere they can find a home is just a great success story. We want to keep those bees where they are and help to repopulate their populations
Right.
in areas all across the country. So
You bring up a couple of interesting points that I wanted to talk about. Since they are dying, and let's say somebody says, "Oh, I've got bees in a crack in my wall." What should they do? Should they call somebody to have it removed? Should they buy
yeah.
some poison and squirt it into the wall? I mean, what's a good ecological thing for people to do when they find something like that, where the bee doesn't care if it's a house or a tree? It just says, "Hey, this looks like a good spot," right?
Yeah.
But
Well, I would definitely advise not to use any sort of like pesticides. It's it's bad for the bees, of course, but you're not taking care of the situation. Bees in walls is pretty rare, but it can happen, especially with like old sheds and things like that. And depending on your situation, it can be pretty tricky to access them. So there's always, the local beekeeping association. There's one for every county. There's a statewide directory. Anyone in the country can look them up and contact their local beekeepers if they have some honeybees to relocate. But when they're in the walls, it can involve needing, to like open up the walls and things like that. And, you want to remove everything. You don't want a bunch of dead bees rotting in your walls, even if you do want them removed at all costs and you're willing to do pesticides. It's still probably not a good solution. So we would always advise to relocate them, and do so in a way that involves a professional beekeeper or local beekeeper, so that you or your contractor isn't, getting too knee deep in a beehive inside of your house. Because there's ways to safely do so. And it's kind of a fascinating experience. Maybe your local beekeeper can help you get it set up in your backyard in an actual beehive, giving them a proper home. But there's also other types of bees out there that tend to gravitate towards wooden structures. If you're familiar with like the mason bees or the carpenter bees.
Oh, the carpenter bees. Oh, yeah.
Especially coastal homes, untreated wood. They really love that stuff. And one thing you can do is obviously plug up the old holes, but also spray them with some just natural peppermint oil and soapy water to keep the bees out. You can do that during the day, and they'll go find a new home, or plug up the holes. But untreated wood is what they like. So if you keep that painted or you keep it sealed, they're not going to be as likely to take up shop in your house or in your shingles.
Peppermint oil and soapy water.
Yeah.
There really is, you don't have to go and get the stuff that I want to talk about, weed killers and all that kind of stuff in a moment. Yeah. But the other thing I wanted to talk about, which kind of has to do with the safety of honeybees and all of that. At one point, I take my lawnmower and go right up in front of the two beehives. I have two of them. And, if I stood there and held the lawnmower in front of the hives, they'd probably get aggravated, but they don't care. I'll just walk right through them as they're flying in and out of the hive. They don't bother me. I'm not bothering them. And people think I'm nuts, but like you said, they don't care. They're on a mission.
Exactly. That's how bees work. You going by with the lawnmower, some guard bees might take notice, but they're not going to have that response because, like I said, they have to release their pheromones. So you really have to disturb the hive itself, open it up, and then they start to, release their pheromones and exhibit that defensiveness. But it typically takes some time. And, you coming by with the lawnmowers, they're probably familiar. They probably know you and are familiar with that sound, and they know it's not a threat at this point.
Right. That's very true. The other thing is now we're in prime swarm season, correct?
Yes, we are. Yeah.
And I remember I've had the swarm a number of times. The first time it ever happened, I didn't know what was going on. I was like, oh my God, what have I done? Because it was like this cyclone of bees in the yard, and they filled the yard. At any rate, we had another swarm where we have two colonies, and that's why we have two. We had the beekeeper come because I called and I said, hey, look, they've swarmed and they've clustered on this bush. It's really low. We can capture them. And she came and with her bare hand, stuck her hand in the cluster of bees and just pulled out a handful of the bees, and nothing happened. And I thought, oh my gosh, look at this. And then she captured the queen and shook a bunch of them into this portable hive and trimmed these little branches off and shook them all in. And as the queen was moving from the bush into the portable hive, the whole yard just filled up again with the swarm. And I was standing there in a t-shirt and jeans and my iPad recording this, with making a video of it. And I'm standing there in this swarm, and nothing happened. And people look at it and they go, weren't you scared? And I said, no, because, and you explain why swarms aren't anything to be afraid of.
Yeah. So for the listeners, a swarm is actually a normal thing that bees do. It's how we refer to a specific behavior when, the bees produce such a large population that the queen no longer has an ability to lay eggs. It's kind of their natural instinct to swarm. So at some point in the season, typically, May and June, the queen decides it's time for her to leave the hive and go find a new home. So she'll release a specific pheromone that communicates to the bees that this is happening. Half of the population will eat as much honey as they can to prepare for the journey, and half of that population of worker bees will leave with the old queen. And when they leave the hive, it's a lot of activity. It's like a big amount of bees kind of flying through the sky all together. They don't go very far, typically stay within the property and perch up on a tree branch like you described, in a cluster of bees. So they kind of they stop flying as much, and they become this big clump of bees that is just dangling from your tree. And they're at this time, they're completely docile. So once they've decided to swarm, they've left the hive, they no longer have a home to defend, and they don't exhibit any defensiveness. They don't release defense pheromones. And like you saw with the beekeeper, we just walk right up to the hive or the swarm cluster, and we just grab those bees and put them into a container that we, establish into a new beehive. And essentially, if you can grab the queen in the first clump and get her into the box, if you can't access the remainder of the swarm, they'll actually follow the scent of their queen right into the box, and so you'll see them actually walking in like a line, going right inside of where we've moved the new queen.
That was fascinating to watch happen because she got the queen into the box. There was this big cloud of bees, and then she said, "Okay, I'm just going to leave this box here and go look at the hive that the group that was left behind." And within 10, 15 minutes, all of them just coalesced into that travel hive, if you will. And it was fascinating. It was like they all sucked themselves into this box.
Yeah. They were so happy to find a new home. Yeah, it was great. It was a good spot for them because typically they don't find a great home. They'll typically die or get eaten by some birds, or, they'll maybe find a tree, but it's not great for overwintering. So it's always good to find a new home. And, back in the hive that the queen left behind, she's got half of the worker bees are there, and they're developing new queens, which will then hatch in the next few days. Mm-hmm. And those queens that hatch actually will battle for control of the hive, and the surviving queen, will then take over by, going on a mating flight and then returning to the hive to, start a new, lineage, so to speak. So as beekeepers, we try to mitigate this behavior by taking what we call like artificial swarms or splits from the hive, removing some of the brood frames and capped queen cells to prevent the queen from thinking that she needs to leave, making sure that she feels like she can stick around. And so, inevitably over the years, it's possible that your hive will swarm, but it's actually a really good sign, and it's a good thing and healthy behavior for the bees. But of course, urban beekeeping being our specialty, we want to, prevent swarms from, happening as much as possible, just to cut down on the nuisance of just, bees ending up in places where bees were not expected.
You see like people's cars in a parking lot somewhere, they land on the door handle or something, and it's just like, oh my gosh. But yeah, they're really I can attest they're harmless at that point.
Definitely.
Really. Yeah.
And they're fascinating too. So if anyone ever sees them, check out those beekeeping associations I mentioned. Local beekeepers are always looking to catch swarms in their area. Bees are a limited resource. We don't always have, bees for everyone every season. So anytime we can access new colonies like a swarm, beekeepers are looking for that. So contact the local beekeeping association if you do come across a swarm. Send them a picture and let them know where it is, and they'll be right out to collect it.
Yeah.
And Best Bees does that too.
Okay. I'm going to put the contact information for you folks in the show notes, and also I'll go find some links to those beekeeping association, actually the local one here, because this is the All About Quincy podcast. So that actually leads to a nice segue about Quincy, and you've been involved with a number of installations in Quincy. Talk to us about that if you can.
Yeah, as you know, Quincy's really going through quite a revitalization, you could say, these years. It's been cool to see. It seems like more and more people are really excited about the future of Quincy, and I've seen a lot. And of course, environmental impact, and we have to think about habitat. And so with bees and pollinators in general, habitat loss is the number one reason for their decline in health. And we've partnered with a local real estate company called Fox Rock Properties. And they have office buildings in North Quincy, Quincy Center, South Quincy, and they've been a big part of the development there in downtown Quincy. And what we're doing is installing beehives on the rooftop, maintaining them and engaging their tenants in really fun educational programs. People get honey from the properties, and we're also doing research. So we collect data from all of the beehives we maintain, including yours, John.
Yeah.
So that visit data helps us to manage the hives, but it also helps us to look at and quantify pollinator health in certain areas. Basically, like I said, they're indicator species. The native pollinators are difficult to study. They don't have hives we can look at. They're solitary, and it's hard to really keep up with them. So the honeybee health is a really good indicator of the native species health, and we're looking at a colony's health over the years, as well as diving deep into the data of their nutrition through honey DNA. We actually take a small sample of honey from the hives, send it to our lab for genomic analysis, and then we get back a full list of the different plants that the bees foraged from to produce that honey.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the 23andMe of honey. We learn a lot about their diet, and of course, it's similar to people. A diverse diet does correlate with better bee health, and there's gaps in forage. Some places don't have enough plants, maybe in early spring or late fall, to sustain healthy colonies of honeybees, which is a good indication that there is also not enough habitat for the native species. So, we're doing this in Quincy. We're monitoring, bee health in Quincy, and through our partnerships with companies like Foxrock Properties, we can advise on plantings and habitat restoration that will impact all pollinator species. And being able to measure that over time is really important, so we can actually see the difference in habitat and diet changing in the bees over the years. And it's a fun thing. It's a fun thing when you have bees at work. It's a
Right.
cool thing to do, and you get to have fun bee related events. Beehive tours and honey tastings, and the honey can be used to create honey ice cream or honey beer. There's a lot of fun things that these properties will do with the different companies that have offices there.
That sounds like fun. I just have to let people know that I have this dog in the background who is snoring. So if you hear like little snores, that's Zoe, the wonder dog, sleeping in the back of the studio here.
So, good job, Zoe.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, you're talking about gaps in forage. It's Pollinator Week. What are some of the things that people listening, if they're interested, can do to create a more pollinator friendly environment in general?
Well, number one, obviously plantings. Anything we can plant to create forage for the bees is great. A really great resource is the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. It's a long name, but the website is xerces.org.
I'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah, there's just really great local guides for pollinator habitat establishment. You can plant things that bloom in early spring and late fall. Those are really good for bees because that's typically where we notice the gaps in forage.
Okay.
And then there's also great guides for things like establishing pollinator meadows. Meadows of native wildflowers to New England that are blooming year round and providing that food for them year round. So, number one is plantings. Number two, cut back on all of the pesticides. It's tough to see people spraying so much that they may be not needing to. Check in with your landscapers if you don't do it yourself, and really check in to see what they're using and if it's necessary or if there are natural alternatives. It really affects the native bees even more than the honeybees, where they just don't have, a whole population to rely on, or a queen who can just lay even more eggs and create more bees. It's just, pesticides can wipe out populations.
Yeah. And I also have to think on some level, it's hurting us,
Yeah.
I mean, eventually it gets into the food supply and it makes its way into us, and I kind of have to wonder. So do you know, I mentioned, I think it may have been before we were recording, but I've actually taken a mixture of vinegar and water, or mostly vinegar, and just squirted it on some weeds popping up in the middle of, like crabgrass coming up in between some bricks in my walkway or something like that. Are there some natural things that people can do that are totally benign to pollinators and people and really inexpensive but very effective?
Yeah, I mean, what you did is a great option. I think that works really well. You can also put down like a tarp and cover up the area from any sunlight to kill all the plants, or weed them yourselves. And the biggest thing is, like, when things are in bloom, maybe consider leaving them. It's Pollinator Week. If you've got, weeds that are blooming, they may not look as great to you, or you might not want them, but they're essential food for bees. So I always say, if you can leave them, that's great. But if not, try something natural, like you said, or, weed them yourselves, and just never, ever spray any sort of pesticide or, chemical treatment on flowers in bloom, because that's a stop for a bee somewhere to, grab a bite to eat. And, you just don't want to have that, be exposed to the whole colony, or, kill a native bee. It's just best to leave the weeds, or do something like a little more natural.
And a lot of people might be thinking, well, what's the big deal? And it's like, well, we get a lot of our food from these pollinators. So it does impact us.
It's an entire ecosystem. Not only are over 100 fruits and vegetables that we eat pollinated by honeybees and other bee species, but the thousands of different plants that require pollination to survive, and these native bees are a part of a big ecosystem, and they're disappearing due to habitat loss from development, from people having just green lawns and removing all of the weeds. And it's just so important that we don't lose these species and the biodiversity that we have already here in Quincy or in New England. It's under threat, and we have to really be considerate to why we are landscaping in the ways that we are, and what are some simple ways that we can have beautiful flowers but also contribute to the health of our local ecology.
That sounds great. So I would be remiss if I didn't let you talk a little bit about what the Best Bees Company does. Why don't you tell everybody what the Best Bees Company does, the services you provide, and if people want to learn more, how they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, of course. It's, the Best Bees Company is a national group of beekeepers. We have beekeepers in 14 cities across the country now, and we provide beekeeping services. It's really the hands-off approach to having your own beehives, supporting pollinator research, and even producing your own honey. So, we've designed things to be just all-inclusive of everything needed for happy, healthy honeybee colonies, including the beekeepers. So you wouldn't have to do the work yourself, but you have your own bees and learn a lot about the process. And like we were saying, we take a real data-driven approach to it, and view all of the bees as indicator species. We've got a sister nonprofit research organization called the Urban Bee Lab that actually takes the data that we collect and analyzes it alongside other data sets with our research partners, helping to advance our mission to improve bee health through research and expand populations. But it's a cool thing too when your beehives not only are producing delicious backyard honey, they're also NASA data points, helping with, studying the native pollinator species around your area. And, spring is here. We are still installing beehives in areas around the country. So if you are interested, especially in Quincy, we have beehives and are doing that all this month. You can get in touch with us at bestbees.com, book an assessment, or give us a call at 617-445-2322. We are local. We're Boston area based, and we would love to have some more beehives this season, in your backyard or on your rooftop.
And I have to say, I don't even know how long I've been a client of yours now, but it's been at least 7 years, I think. And it's one of those things that it's been a lot of fun. And what Sam says is true. If you're looking to do something to help the environment and also have some fun, but not have to really do a lot yourself, you just kind of give them a spot in your yard and they do it all. And another question I get all the time is, how much honey do you get? And I said, well, it depends. It depends on the weather. It depends on a whole bunch of factors. 1 year I didn't get any, but you folks provide some anyway, because sometimes that happens. The colony can be just a little slow and not really kind of get established. And you need to make sure that they have enough food to make it through the winter, because that's the goal. I think you have a program where you're guaranteed at least a minimum amount of honey.
Yeah. We've got other hives too that we maintain in our reserve apiaries. So we provide, every client with 5 pounds or more of local honey at the end of the year if their colonies don't produce. It does happen when establishing a new colony, because we want to make sure that they have enough resources to get through winter, especially here in New England.
Right.
But it's those subsequent seasons when they make it through winter and they go into spring healthy and a strong population, they really can capitalize on that early nectar flow and produce, quite a bit of honey, as you know.
Oh, yeah. Somebody said, how much honey did you get? Well, I said, 1 year I got like 49 pounds of honey. And they're like, really? I said, yep. So, if you're looking to do something and it really helps. Oh, and my neighbors love it, by the way, Sam, because
Yeah, I bet they do.
Well, they love it because not just for the honey, but they have apple trees and pear trees and peach trees and berries and nuts, and all around the neighborhood, there's people with pear trees and apple trees. And the guy, I was just talking to my neighbor, he said, my apple tree is absolutely loaded this year. And so he's all excited. And so, I mean, it has effects just beyond your yard. It does good things for the neighborhood. And if you're looking for a hands-off thing to do, give Sam a call. What's the phone number again, Sam?
Yeah, it's the phone number for Best Bees is 617-445-2322. And you can also check us out at bestbees.com.
Sam, I want to thank you for your time today. You've been very generous with your time. And thank you so much for sharing some information. Is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners that you make sure gets out before we end the show?
Yeah, I would say, make sure that you're doing something this pollinator week for the bees, sprinkle some wildflower seeds at least, and get in touch with Best Bees, even if it's just to, keep up with the pollinator research that we're doing. John, thanks so much for having me and giving me the opportunity to talk about bees on your podcast. I talk about bees all day long, as you can imagine, but it's always great to share with a larger audience. And I'd love to give a shout out to, all of the Best Bees Quincy clients who I hope are listening. Thank you guys so much for the support. And John, thank you.
You're very welcome, Sam. Thank you. And good luck with all the stuff you have going on for Pollinator Week.
Yeah, thank you. It's a busy time of the year. Spring's a great time to be beekeeping, but we are busy. So thank you, John. Yeah. And good luck with everything else this spring you've got going on.
Thank you. Bibbidi bobbidi bee, that was really cool. That's it for this episode. Next week, I think we're going to have some folks on from the Quincy Historical Society leading up to July 4th, Independence Day. Make sure you tune in for that. And if you have an idea for someone who should be a guest on the All About Quincy podcast, go to allaboutquincypodcast.com, click on the contact button in the upper right-hand corner, and tell us who they are and why you think they should be a guest on the All About Quincy podcast. We want to interview business leaders, historians, unsung heroes. If you think they should be on the show, we want to hear about it. So go to allaboutquincypodcast.com, click on the contact button in the upper right-hand corner, and send us the email. Until next week, thanks for listening.